just MailChimped my marketing.
You MailChimped your what?
I MailChimped my marketing with AI to create an effective marketing campaign in minutes.
No, MailChimp and Way.
Yes, MailChimp and Way. Now I can hyper-personalize my campaigns across email and SMS.
You can do all that with MailChimp?
What did I just MailChimp and say?
MailChimp your marketing with the #1 AI-powered email marketing and automation platform, Intuit MailChimp. #1 based on publicly available data on competitors' customers. Plans vary. SMS available as add-ons. Visit MailChimp.com.
This episode is brought to you by Old El Paso. Does game day hosting feel like an extreme sport? Not anymore. With Old El Paso, feeding your hungry crowd is oh so easy. Old El Paso's crunchy stand-and stuffed shells, bold seasonings, and squeezable sauces are fumble-free, flavor-packed, and perfect for cheering on your team. Football season is taco season with Old El Paso. Level up your next tailgate or watch party. Shop game day essentials at oldelpaso.com.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MBO. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome on into another edition of Eye on the Enemy, powered by the Eagles Pin Pull Network. I'm your host, John Stolnis. You can read my work over at bleedinggreennation.com. Coming up, it's Eagles-Cowboys week, and it is lacking a little bit of the juice that we normally get from Eagles-Cowboys week, given how Dallas's season is going so far, but always one of the biggest rivalries in the NFL, and this week, of course, no different, as the Birds try to go into Dallas and win for the first time since 2017, their Super Bowl season. Carson Wentz under center, trying to get a win in Dallas for the first time since then. It has been a while, 7 years since the Eagles went into Dallas to get a victory. I'm going to talk with RJ Ochoa, a good friend of the podcast from bloggingtheboys.com, the Dallas Cowboys SB Nation site, in just a second here to give his take on just what has gone wrong in Dallas here in 2024. The Cowboys at 3-5 entering this game against the Eagles, coming in at a robust 6-2 on the season. Winners of 4 straight. The Cowboys have lost 3 in a row, so both of these teams heading in totally different directions. And it's been a lost season with some head-scratching and mystifying moves by team owner Jerry Jones here since the Cowboys' loss to the Packers in the playoffs last season. Also, we'll get into some thoughts about Saquon Barkley, whether or not he needs a little bit of rest, and we'll go through the Week 10 schedule and give you some thoughts on key games of interest to you, the Eagles fan, as far as what we'll be watching this weekend and on Monday night as well. Lots to get to here on this edition of Eye on the Enemy. Well, and joining me to break this game down on Sunday afternoon, a game that at the beginning of the season sure felt like it had divisional title aspirations or stakes to it, but certainly a different feel to this game as we are getting into it. RJ Ochoa, fantastic friend of the podcast. He is, of course, the big guy in charge of blogging the boys, the SB Nation Cowboys site, so you can catch everything that he's got going on in the blogging the boys stratosphere there. RJ, welcome back to Eye on the Enemy. How are you, buddy?
Doing well, John. Only 9 games left, so it's great to be with you, and great to be this much closer to this whole experience being over.
Yeah, man, it's not good when in Week 10 you're already counting down the weeks until the season is over. And I must tell you, at the beginning of the season, during the off season, just reading a lot of your tweets and the articles over at Blogging the Boys, and just the vibe around the Cowboys, it was never good. Coming off of that playoff loss last year, the vibes around the team never improved during the course of the off season, and it carried into the season. And you guys had a phenomenal Week 1. It looked like, okay, the Cowboys are going to put all that behind them. They're going to roll through this season. You know, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with, but. 2-5 since that opening week, and Dak Prescott now on the shelf. Before we get into the nitty gritty, give me the big picture. What the heck has happened here in the first half of the season in Dallas?
Well, you mentioned it. Obviously, the off season. People use words like difficult or challenging or whatever. I don't think it was any of those things because it was completely self-induced, right? Like, this wasn't like a set of circumstances that was beyond the team's control. I call it arrogance, call it hubris, call it, ignorance, call it bliss, I guess, in that sense. I mean, this was a team that did nothing, and that's been extraordinarily well documented. Their cash spending is lowest in the NFL, and not just this past season, but seasons over the past 3 years or whatever the case may be. They are notorious for not being involved in free agency, and I think that that was par for the course, but I'd say that they stirred the pot. The all-in comment obviously kind of reared its ugly head and became the face for everything. And that they were coming off of the playoff loss they were was so disheartening. For the context around that, look, this is a team, obviously their drought is well documented as well. But they had home field advantage to the playoffs, outside of obviously the Niners, who were the 1 seed, and they had been undefeated at home. And it felt like, at the very least, okay, you're going to get to the NFC Championship game. You're finally going to break that seal, and you'll probably get smoked by San Francisco, but at least we can, start to, move on a little bit as a franchise. And that they were so broken was just such a devastating thing for people. And so to do nothing in response to that and to stir the pot, not just with regards to building the 2024 roster, but with delaying the extensions that inevitably came, as everybody said that they would, for CeeDee Lamb and for Dak Prescott. You mentioned week 1. They signed Dak on literally the day that the season began. I mean, it was literally like 10:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. It's the Sunday of week 1 when the Dak Prescott deal finally got done. So, I mean, it sounds hyperbolic and like I'm being dramatic for effect, but I'm not. They went about this thing in the most ineffective, toxic possible manner that they could, and they've benefited from playing Deshaun Watson, Justin Fields, and Daniel Jones, which is why they have 3 wins right now.
I got to say, as I've been kind of watching Jerry Jones and the way the Cowboys have approached things, so really, like you mentioned, the last few years, it really does remind me, and I don't know how many fans of this podcast were around during the Norman Brayman days, but it really has a feel like, they had the Eagles teams had good players. They made the playoffs. They never got over the hump. It was a team that didn't want to spend. Norman Brayman claimed poor, and he looked at the Eagles as an investment, and he wasn't going to, as free agency was dawning in the NFL, he was not going to play in those waters. He was not going to take part in that. The team was going to suffer because, they were not going to pay players what they should. And so they weren't aggressive. And again, this was before free agency. Now you have free agency. The Cowboys are they really have a license to just print money. I mean, that's what doesn't make sense. I mean, I realize there's a salary cap in the NFL, and maybe the Eagles are slightly better at managing that cap, manipulating the cap better than a lot of teams. But it would seem to me it's mystifying sitting here in Philadelphia. The approach that Jerry Jones has had, is he deluded into thinking his team is better than it is? Is it penny pinching? Is it just simply some third factor that I can't think of? Like what is it? Why is he doing things the way he's doing them?
It's strange because from a general like philosophical roster construction perspective, a year ago the Cowboys had some veteran trades that they made for Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore, and those are the kind of corner cutting methods that we see elite front offices like the Eagles make kind of year in and year out. And it was such a breath of fresh air to see them do that, to see them understand how they could capitalize and take advantage of things like that. And they abandoned that, obviously. And so we know that they're capable of it. And so I think the most frustrating thing is to try to answer that question is it's not one specific common denominator. It's not one thing that has been the perpetuating force for why he or they are like this that has been the case for forever now. It just constantly changes and it contradicts itself. People still get all up in a tizzy because Jerry will say something in one of his flagship radio station appearances that contradicts what he said the week prior. He'll contradict himself mid-interview, mid-sentence sometimes. And the reality of the situation is he is of the 1% in this world. And he can afford, quite literally, to contradict himself. And nothing that he says is going to have ramifications or consequences relative to himself and certainly not relative to Cowboys fans that want to see this team succeed. But if I had to isolate one thing, I would say that Jerry is Frank Sinatra my waying this. I mean, like he would rather kind of fail his way than succeed anybody else's. And I think that if we have learned anything throughout the post Jimmy Johnson portion of the Jerry Jones ownership era of the Dallas Cowboys, it's that he would rather sign Zeke Elliott and forego pick who you want, Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry or Devin Singletary or Austin Eckler, and say, I'm going to turn Zeke back. I'm going to lean on the vibes or the whatever of it all. I mean, and this is a very common thing. Zeke Elliott is back with the team. Jason Witten returned from the Monday Night Football booth to be the team's primary tight end. Kellen Moore became offensive coordinator after 1 year of coaching experience with the team who he played for, coaching the quarterbacks who beat him out on the roster. There is a spirit of, call it favoritism, nepotism, whatever you want. I would call it specificism. And if you're on Jerry Jones's list of what he wants, then that's ultimately what happens the most.
For Philadelphia sports fans, this reeks of the Philadelphia Flyers always bringing back alumni and guys back for second and third time around without, injecting new blood into the organization. But that's neither here nor there. So let's talk a little bit about injuries. The Eagles look like they're going to be getting some guys back for this game. AJ Brown looks like he's going to play. You've got Dallas Goedert back for this game. So the Eagles are coming in. Darius Slay is going to play. It looks like the Eagles are getting healthier. Whereas the Cowboys certainly have a big injury at the most important position, and that is Dak Prescott. Now, the team was struggling before Dak Prescott went down with the hamstring injury, but now he's going to be out for at least a few weeks and certainly will not play on Sunday afternoon, which means we get another game of Cooper Rush starting for the Dallas Cowboys against Philadelphia Eagles. It's obviously good timing for the Eagles. Dak Prescott, no matter what seems to be going on in the world, has good games against Philadelphia most of the time. But can you kind of lay out what the Dak Prescott situation is and any other injury issues that we should be aware of?
Yeah, so for anyone who missed it, sometimes that happens obviously in the noon window of games. Dak Prescott had an injury against the Atlanta Falcons earlier, I should say late in the third quarter, and the broadcast showed him kind of having his thumb tended to his throwing hand, and everybody kind of initially assumed that was the injury that was plaguing him, and he was ruled out of the game, and everybody assumed that it had to do with that, and it wasn't until midway through the fourth quarter that there was a report from the sideline that it's a hamstring injury, and everybody was kind of like, whoa, when did this happen? And entering the game, there had been all this discussion about Dak Prescott not running as often as he had. He's not Jalen Hurts or anything like that, but he had been somewhat mobile throughout his career, and he did run. He had a 22-yard rush in this game, which was the longest rush play, that any Cowboys player has had since Christmas Eve of last year. That was also Dak Prescott to own in on how non-explosive they are in the rushing department. But that being said, it was revealed after that this was a serious hamstring injury in the days that followed, one that would knock him out multiple weeks, to your point, and NFL Network's Shane Slater reported that his hamstring is partially torn off of the bone. So there's a potential that it's season-ending, that it requires surgery. Certainly, the team's record and situation, affects that and impacts that in the obvious ways. And yeah, I mean, this next 5-game stretch for Dallas, including this game against Philadelphia, is extraordinarily difficult. They've got Philadelphia, then Houston, then they travel to face Washington. They've got the Giants on Thanksgiving Day, and then they host the Bengals on Monday Night Football, a second Monday night game right after that. And so you do kind of feel like 2010 Tony Romo, 2015 Tony Romo, and like we probably have seen the last of Dak this year. As far as other injuries are concerned, CeeDee Lamb did have an AC joint sprain in the same game, but he does appear fine. DeMarcus Lawrence remains on injured reserve. Deron Bland was somebody who the Cowboys opened the practice window for before they played the Detroit Lions, their last game in this building where they got embarrassed. And they have yet to make him a part of the active roster, so kind of a flub on opening that window. Micah Parsons is not on injured reserve, but has not played since the Cowboys beat the Giants on Thursday Night Football way back when. And it does kind of feel like he might play. So if I had to put a positivity scale, I'd say I feel pretty confident that CD plays. I feel somewhat confident that Micah plays. Deron Bland is kind of a real question mark at this point in time. And as the Cowboys continue to lose games, obviously, you do wonder whether or not they'll say, let's just keep Micah on ice, Deron Bland on ice, and kind of punt towards 2025.
So we could be looking at no Micah Parsons here on Sunday afternoon.
It's possible. I mean, again, it's a little bit, more touch and go, I think. He did have, I assume, we've never spoken about this, but you've seen The Waterboy. If you haven't, then I do have to reevaluate my friendship with you.
I've seen The Waterboy many times. Yeah.
Early on in the week, Micah shared gif of Adam Sandler walking in at halftime saying, "Y'all remember when Bobby Boucher showed up and the Mud Dogs won the Bourbon Bowl?" So that kind of made it seem like Micah was, feeling like he was going to play this week. So that's why I do feel kind of positive. I think that, we're on the verge, especially if the Cowboys lose this game moving forward, of seeing how much of a white flag the Cowboys are willing to wave on this season. If they are willing to kind of shelve Micah, shelve Deron Bland, have Dak Prescott undergo season-ending surgery, things like that. But they're kind of at that break point and ready for the Eagles to push them over the edge.
Yeah, so I was going to say, this seems like an inflection point game for the Dallas Cowboys, and let's talk about some of the injury matchups. I mean, not the injury matchups, the matchups in game. And let's take a look at the Cowboys offense against the Eagles defense. Obviously, they've had some issues on both sides of the ball. What is a matchup that you think the Cowboys can exploit here as we're going into a game against an improved Eagles defense over the last 4 weeks, really since the bye and Cooper DeJean was inserted into the starting lineup?
I promise I'm not trying to be silly or dramatic or anything like that, but I really can't think of one. You asked about matchups, and a tool I use, this isn't an ad for them, but is I have an NFL Pro subscription, and they do such a great job of outlining key advantages and matchups and who's projected to win those matchups within a given game. And you look at this game, it's literally all Eagles. I mean, they kind of color coded and whatever. It's literally nothing but green. I mean, it is pure, unadulterated Philadelphia, leaning, because how could it not be at this point in time? And especially without Dak Prescott under center. I mean, Dak Prescott, I think, the Cowboys are over a touchdown underdog in this game. And I think that would be fair with Dak. I mean, so the fact that it's Cooper Rush is really just kind of, going to limit what they do offensively. They are the worst rushing team in the NFL. They have only CeeDee Lamb as an aerial weapon. Jake Ferguson is obviously kind of nice and had some moments last year, but things haven't quite materialized there. So, I mean, you put Cooper Rush into that situation with a defense, and I know you asked about the offense, but they can't, limit things and can't give him the ball back the way that they did in that 5-game run in 2022. It just feels like a situation where Philadelphia is just going to pounce on them over and over and over again. I mean, maybe, I would, Tyler Smith, the Cowboys left guard, is very good. So, Cooper Rush won't be under pressure from that particular spot, but everywhere else, they're kind of up a creek.
So how do they approach this game then? Do they rely on a ground game? I think Rico Dowdle looked better last week, 6.3 yards a carry. I think he had 75 yards on 12 carries last I saw. I mean, do you try to just keep the ball away from Philadelphia's offense here and try to establish a run game? And if so, how capable are they of doing that?
I don't think the run game issue has been a big one for the team. If anyone didn't see or didn't pay attention, 2 weeks ago when the Cowboys went to San Francisco, their first game out of the bye, they promoted Dalvin Cook from the practice squad for the first time. And there was some controversy around that as it was revealed that Saturday that Dalvin Cook was going to get called up, and so that led to conversations of who's going to be inactive. Somebody's got to be inactive for Dalvin Cook to have a spot. Zeke Elliott had never been a healthy scratch for the Dallas Cowboys. He had been, but in week 17, week 18 situations when they were kind of, prepping for the playoffs. And Zeke is on that list of favorite sons of the organization.
Yeah.
And Rico Dowdle came down with a mysterious illness 2 hours before kickoff in San Francisco, which ruled him out of the game. And so you did have a lot of conspiracy theorists who thought, are they this desperate to not have Zeke Elliott be inactive? But Rico has been, I'd say, a moderately good NFL running back, but because of what's around him in this room, he's looked exemplary. Because I mean, it's literally, washed Dalvin Cook, washed Zeke Elliott, still yet to fully arrive in the NFL Deuce Vaughn. But that is kind of the only way they can do anything on offense, which is a difficult thing to understand. The last time the Cowboys played a game in this building was that Lions game I mentioned. They didn't score a single touchdown, and I feel like that's quite the possibility in this game against Philadelphia because the Eagles' defense is coming along.
They really are, and it's been a fun group to watch. I mean, they have their weaknesses, they have their moments, but it seems as though since the bye, Vic Fangio has gotten a little bit more aggressive, sending some more guys here and there, but just allowing the younger players to kind of use their athleticism. It seems like they actually have a couple of linebackers here that you can kind of build some hope around with Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean. Cooper DeJean obviously has strengthened things in the middle of the defense. We'll see if that manifests itself in better play against Jake Ferguson and CeeDee Lamb. But certainly the Eagles Pass rush has been a little bit better. Hoping to get a couple of sacks against Cooper Rush here. A lot of Coopers on the field on Sunday afternoon. Let's take a look at the Cowboys defense here and just kind of looking at some of these numbers. Giving up 5.9 yards per play. It's tied for second worst in the NFL. 7.3 net yards per pass attempt, which is second worst, tied with the Jaguars. Only the Panthers are worse there. Giving up 4.5 yards per rush. It's tied for 20th. It's actually 4.6, but 4.5 sounds more conversational. 28.1 points per game, second worst in the NFL. They're dead last in red zone defense. They have the second best hurry rate in the NFL, but only 7 teams have fewer sacks, 18 sacks for the Dallas Cowboys. And the big ingredient that's missing is, of course, Dan Quinn leaving his defensive coordinator and going over to the Washington Commanders. Can you pin a lot of this on the departure of Dan Quinn? Obviously, I know some injuries are playing a part as well.
I was ready to move on from Dan Quinn. I don't know how well you remember the Cowboys hosted the Seahawks last year in December on Thursday Night Football, and that was my break point. And then they got run all over by Buffalo, by Miami, and I maintained that it was the proper decision. Obviously, it wasn't theirs, but I was fine with Dan Quinn leaving, and the fact that he's doing well is kind of a good for him sort of thing. I don't know how you can't say that it has nothing to do with Dan Quinn, but I know I've spoken to you about this. The year of Dan Quinn that, when he arrived was 2021. And that was the Trayvon Diggs crazy interception season. That was obviously Micah Parsons' rookie year. And the next offseason, anytime I was behind a microphone or anything like that, I said, there's no way this team is going to have as many turnovers in 2022. There's no way they're going to have as many sacks. There was going to be regression to the mean. That didn't happen in 2022. And it didn't happen in 2023. So I think that they were just kind of due. They had been the 1% in that sense for so long, living at one end of the spectrum. So I think we've seen that. Obviously, the injuries haven't helped. But what a surprise that the defensive coordinator, who hadn't been in the NFL for a handful of years, is kind of bad at this. I was not on. I don't like to be the I told you so guy, but I was not on board with the Mike Zimmer hire. And for context, the only other people who the Cowboys seriously reportedly interviewed beyond Mike Zimmer, who has been their defensive coordinator before, talk about retreads, were Ron Rivera and Rex Ryan. That was it. I mean, so again, it kind of falls back on them not really approaching this seriously and just, assuming that players like Michael Parsons and Trayvon Diggs would carry them. And they have been really bad, and they're not getting really respected by anybody. They have loaded the box at the 5th highest rate in the NFL. And despite that, teams are running at their loaded boxes at the 3rd highest rate in the NFL. Obviously, Micah is, again, a straw that stirs the drink. DeMarvion Overshown has come along, been a really bright spot in what has been a lost season for the team. But they are quite possibly the worst defense in the NFL. And just to tie a bow on that, a number I would say for Eagles fans to shoot for, the Cowboys currently, John, have allowed 415 total yards to be found against them in 5 consecutive home games. That does date back to their Lions win last year, the controversial ending. No team in NFL history has done it 6 times in a row. The Cowboys are one of 2 teams to do it 5 in a row. So if Philadelphia has 415 total yards, and Kellen Moore knows where the bodies are buried on defense here, it would be a historical low for the Cowboys.
It is amazing how Jerry Jones keeps going back to the retreads of an era that didn't result in a Super Bowl victory. I mean, normally you get enamored with the Super Bowl or the World Series, and you bring back the old favorites from your glory years, but the glory years weren't overly glorious. So I mean, it's just an interesting mindset. Last thing for you, thoughts on Jalen Hurts this year? Obviously, great in 2022, up and down, kind of an uneven season last year in 2023, and he was a turnover-prone quarterback before the bye in the 4 games leading into the bye when the Eagles were 2-2. In the 4 games that they've all won since the bye, passer rating of 132.3, 132.5, 119.3, 126.1. He hasn't turned the ball over. It looks like I think he's running the ball with a lot more energy and elusiveness than he did a year ago. Your thoughts on Jalen Hurts this year? Do you consider him back to being an elite quarterback? Maybe he never lost that shine for you, but I think most people knocked him out of their top 10 quarterbacks last year. Is he back to being maybe a top 10 quarterback in the league with the way he's playing?
I never thought that 2022 was who Jalen Hurts was, just because I don't think that's who anybody is. Like, I mean, he had an incredible, highly exceptional season that truly was the exception. And, I don't feel this way, but it's a great tragedy that wasn't rewarded with anything serious, including an MVP, obviously, with his injury down the stretch there. I did feel, obviously, that last year was closer to who he probably was and somewhat representative of who he was as a rookie when he did, kind of fill in for Carson Wentz there at the end in that 2021 season that I feel like when Eagles fans talk about Jalen Hurts, it's like, oh, well, 2021 didn't really count. He didn't really become Jalen Hurts till 2022. I do think that who we're seeing now is probably the kind of mean version of him, maybe still a little bit punching above his weight. And I think that that's the result of having an incredible roster around him and Saquon Barkley coming in and changing everything. And people act like with any team that is some demerit against the quarterback, like that he would need help and that he can benefit from help. And I'm, in an objective sense, extraordinarily happy for Jalen Hurts that he has a front office and a coaching staff and a team around him who wants to put him in positions to succeed. And so I think that he is maybe catching up to things a little bit. I know that the leadership stuff has been a weird narrative that's surrounded him that seems to have quieted down. Maybe Saquon has taken over that mantle, but who cares? I mean, they're winning games, and I know you asked about Hurts, but I will also add that I think that Nick Sirianni is an incredible head coach. I really do, and it bums me out to say that. I think he's a top 10 annoying human being, to be very clear.
No, you've never been a fan.
But
Yeah.
Well, I think he's always been a great coach. I think it's just difficult to see under the exterior that he so willfully puts up. And I do think that he certainly incites things that make things more difficult for his team that are just kind of, it's a double-edged sword type of thing. You have to kind of live and die by it, but they are so successful. And I look at these two teams who both kind of faded in their own ways down the stretch last year, that he helped resuscitate that. And nobody wants to give him any credit for that, which is fine by me, don't get me wrong. But I think if we're being fair, we have to give him some. We have to give him a lot of blame, certainly. But I think that Nick Sirianni, if he's not coaching the Eagles somewhere next year, I don't want him coaching the Cowboys, but I will finally kind of be interested in rooting for him if he's somebody else's head coach.
Interesting perspective. Yeah, I've been really hard on Nick Sirianni. I felt like early on he was holding the team back. I still don't know that he's the answer. I worry that in the playoffs, he's going to make decisions that blow up in their faces and end up costing them a trip to the Super Bowl. I don't think he's handled in-game situations at times well. There are times as a fan you feel viscerally, you shouldn't do that. And he goes the other way and it hasn't worked. But, it's easier to remember those times than the times when you say, you shouldn't do that. And he does it, but then it works. And you're like, oh, okay, good. It worked out. Process over results. I get it. And I think, I think maybe there are other aspects to his leadership style behind the scenes. Just last year was such a cluster. And with all the turmoil in the locker room, it seemed like he'd even lost that part of his ability to be a good head coach. But the team seems very together this year. They're playing really well right now. And certainly, I think you're right. I think the Eagles, I was watching NFL.com, all 10 experts picked the Eagles to win this game. And based on what you're telling me, I'm predicting you're going to predict an Eagles win here as well. Can you just give me a sense? How bad do you think it's going to be for you guys?
Yeah, I think this is an easy Eagles victory. I think that it's probably an under on any individual props, though, if that's your thing, just because I think it's something like 20-3 at halftime. And, the Cowboys come out first possession of the second half and throw a pick six. And there's just, you can put Saquon on ice. You can, you don't have to, risk A.J. Brown. You don't have to risk Devontae Smith, things like that. The Cowboys are winless at home. They're one of the only two teams in the NFL who is winless at home this season. The other is the New York Giants. And so this has been what I've coined it, and I'm not the first person to ever say anything like this. This is the most of course possible season for the Cowboys. Of course, Derrick Henry would show up in his game against them and run all over them. Of course, Ben Johnson and the Lions would drag them and have all these offensive line trick plays. Like, what can go wrong will, and in the most embarrassing fashion for this team. So I absolutely believe that they're going to lose and lose soundly in an embarrassing way. And it's going to be a game that you just kind of sit back and enjoy and probably get bored in the second half because it's so out of question. And that's such a bummer. And I know that a lot of Cowboys-Eagles games have been this way with backup quarterbacks and the stars not properly aligning. And so that does bum me out. And it bums me out that I don't even have the energy to look for reasons that this Eagles team is flawed. And that's, if you are curious for the perspective of Cowboys fans, that's really how this feels. I mean, it is such a bummer that there are more games left than have been played for the Cowboys this season. I mean, they have ruined, what is the best time of year, obviously. And so I'm 6-2 at predicting Cowboys games this year. My only two misses were I thought they would beat New Orleans and foolishly Atlanta. But I think that Philadelphia wins this pretty easily.
All right. Well, make sure you're checking out bloggingtheboys.com. You want to keep an eye on the enemy and let you revel in the Cowboys' misery right now. I mean, it is certainly quite a time to be a Cowboys fan, and not in a good way. But RJ Ochoa always puts as positive a spin on things as I think you possibly can. And at the very least, very interesting reads over there at Blogging the Boys, and that's where you can find everything else he's got going on in Cowboy world. RJ, thank you once again for coming on Eye on the Enemy. Always appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks, John. Des caught it.
I just MailChimped my marketing.
You MailChimped your what?
I MailChimped my marketing with AI to create an effective marketing campaign in minutes.
No, MailChimpin' way.
Yes, MailChimpin' way. Now I can hyper-personalize my campaigns across email and SMS.
You can do all that with MailChimp?
What did I just MailChimp and say?
MailChimp your marketing with the #1 AI-powered email marketing and automation platform, Intuit MailChimp. #1 based on publicly available data on competitors' customers. Plans vary. SMS available as add-ons. Visit MailChimp.com.
This episode is brought to you by Old El Paso. Does game day hosting feel like an extreme sport? Not anymore. With Old El Paso, feeding your hungry crowd is oh so easy. Old El Paso's crunchy stand-and stuffed shells, bold seasonings, and squeezable sauces are fumble-free, flavor-packed, and perfect for cheering on your team. Football season is taco season with Old El Paso. Level up your next tailgate or watch party. Shop game day essentials at oldelpaso.com.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MBO. Terms and conditions apply.
All right, well, you just heard RJ talk about it a little bit, and the hope, I think, here is that the Eagles do get a big lead and that they're able to give Saquon Barkley a little bit of rest here in the second half. Been a little bit of conversation. As great as Saquon Barkley has been this year, and he has been absolutely phenomenal, he is getting worked a lot. He's getting a lot of touches, which is, since the Eagles, Lane Johnson went to the team and was talking to them about wanting to establish the run more on early downs. They've done that. Kellen Moore has listened. This is the identity of this team. We're starting to see it come to fruition. And it is an identity based on Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. That is what this team is. And we have seen a dramatic increase in the amount of times they are running the football on first down since the bye week. Something that Lane Johnson told and other members of the offensive line told Kellen Moore that they really thought should be the case. And I've seen this mentioned other places too. I'm just going to echo what I think Shane Haff was saying this in one of his podcasts earlier this week on the Pinpool Network. I've been really hard on Nick Sirianni. I was just saying that a second ago. But he is a guy, going back to his first season as head coach, that is willing to throw some of his stuff out the window and listen to his players and incorporate some of the ideas that his players have. And despite the fact that he's made mistakes on fourth down and going for 2-point conversions when they really should kick the extra point, he took points off the board. Wrote about that for bleedinggreennation.com this week. The Eagles have superior talent than their opponents most weeks. That was certainly the case last week against the Jaguars, and that's what saved them from some of Nick Sirianni's questionable decisions. How many points he took off the board. Even as a fan, you're watching it, and like I said, viscerally, it feels like, no, that's the wrong decision. You shouldn't do that. And the Eagles' talent will only cover up for those mistakes so often. In a playoff game against good teams where the talent level is similar, where it's equal, where you maybe even not, if you get against the Lions may have more talent than the Eagles on the field. And Dan Campbell versus Nick Sirianni in a matchup of wits right now, I'm not taking Nick Sirianni in that battle. So Nick Sirianni is going to have to shore that stuff up and develop a little bit more of an in-game feel, in addition to using the analytics that the team loves to use so much. But that all being said, that is a weakness of Nick Sirianni right now. A strength of his is that the players really do feel like they can go to the coaching staff and that the coaching staff will listen to them and that they will incorporate some of the requests and the wishes, especially if they're coming from somebody like Lane Johnson, who knows his stuff. An established veteran, a vital part of the team. A guy like Brandon Graham probably has that cachet as well. And they went and they said, let's run the ball more. And they've done it. And it has worked. This has become a more balanced offense. It's helping the passing game as well. That should not be lost on anyone. I just read to you Jalen Hurts' passer rating these last 4 weeks. Certainly, I think, the lack of turnovers by not chucking the ball up and forcing things on first and second down and first and second and longs certainly helps. And one of the disadvantages, however, of that is that Saquon Barkley has been getting a lot of run. Now, he still looks great. He still looks fresh, but you don't want him to wear down as the season goes along. And that is something that the New York Giants did with Saquon Barkley because he's all they had. He's all that they had. It's one of the things that I thought getting a running back at the trade deadline would have been a sneaky smart move for the Eagles. But one of the things that could benefit playing Dallas this week is that if this game goes like RJ Ochoa thinks it's going to go, and kind of like how I think it's going to go, that maybe in the third and fourth quarter, you can see a lot of Kenny Gainwell. You can run some Kenny. Maybe this is a 15 carry game for Kenny Gainwell. And maybe you can get Will Shipley in there for 5 or 6 rushing attempts. If you're ahead by 3 touchdowns at some point in the second, or 3-score game in the second half, you know what? Let Saquon sit for a couple of series. Just, get him. Let's see if we can limit Saquon's touches to 15 here in this game against Dallas. I mean, you got to win the game. If it's a close game, you got to run Saquon, and you got to run him until you know you have the game in hand. And you've got to utilize him, and you've got to use A.J. Brown, and you've got to use Devontae Smith. You've got to do those things to win the game. Winning the game is the most important thing. But it would behoove the Eagles to look for ways to kind of get Saquon off the field at different times. Again, when games are well in hand, if you can continue to win games by 2 and 3 and 4 possessions and get these guys some rest, get Saquon Barkley a little bit of rest, because remember, the bye week happened in week 5. There's not going to be that built-in rest unless the Eagles have clinched a home field advantage and you can rest him in the last couple weeks of the season. But given the way the Commanders are playing, given the way the Lions are playing, I don't anticipate that happening. So you're going to need every win. You're probably not going to get that break at the end of the season. So you got to look for ways, I think, to limit his pitch count, right? We talk about that with pitchers. Limit Saquon Barkley's pitch count a little bit here as the second half rolls along, because you're going to want him as fresh as possible for a playoff run, for a late season run, for a run for the 1 seed. Like if you're battling the Lions and the Commanders for the 1 seed, and maybe whoever else steps into the front, do I believe the Cardinals are going to continue to battle the 49ers for the NFC West? I kind of do, but are they going to be? You're trying to fight for postseason positioning, getting a home playoff game, all that kind of stuff. You want Saquon to be at his sharpest at the end of the season. So it would behoove the Eagles to look for ways to do that. I do think that is important. I don't think that is something that should be dismissed out of hand. All right, let's look at the rest of the Week 10 slate as we normally do here at the end of the podcast. You've got the New York Giants in Carolina taking on the Panthers. The Giants are 6.5-point favorites against the Panthers. I mean, look, I don't think the Giants are any good. I don't think the Panthers are any good. This is a battle of two pretty bad teams, but the Giants as road favorites by 6.5. I mean, I get that the Panthers stink, but I think this is the week of Carolina, friends. I think this is the week of the Panthers. I think the Panthers rise up at home and vanquish Brian Daboll and the New York Giants. I think the Panthers win that game and hand the Giants a road loss. That's an insane line. I'm sorry. I think even if the Panthers don't win, I think they cover 6.5 points at home against a not good Giants team. The Giants are not good. Like if that's a slightly better team, I probably don't take the Panthers there. But the Giants are not leaps and bounds better than the Panthers. So I'm taking the Panthers to win that game outright. Another 1 o'clock, and that's a 9:30 game. I think they're playing in Germany, so that's an early Sunday morning game. You've got, so again, I guess that's why it's 6.5. I'm not going to double back on my prediction. I'm going to pick the Panthers to win that game, but it's essentially a road game for both teams. So yeah, ignore everything I said about being at home, but I still will take the Panthers to win that game on a neutral field. You've got the Steelers in Washington to take on the Commanders. The Commanders, the 3-point favorites. So essentially they're saying, we think these two teams are about even. The Commanders have been playing really good football, but you know what? Give me an upset here. I think the Commanders are due for a loss. They're playing really well. I don't think they'll play terribly against the Steelers, but Pittsburgh is showing some moxie this year. You've got Russell Wilson playing decent under center, having a decent season for Pittsburgh since he took over for Justin Fields. And I think they can go into Washington, and I think they can take down a Commanders team that I think is due for a loss. I'm taking Pittsburgh to win that game. Looking elsewhere, this is a game that could have implications for the NFC playoff picture with the Falcons and the Saints. The Saints have just fallen apart. They fired their head coach. Dennis Allen is out of there. Now, sometimes teams can take a coach getting fired and they can use it to springboard and have a better than expected game. I don't see that happening. I think the Falcons really, since that fourth quarter drive against the Eagles on Monday Night Football, their offense has come alive. And I think Kirk Cousins is playing the best football of his career. Give me the Falcons to go into New Orleans and win that game. Minnesota Vikings in Jacksonville to take on the Jaguars. The Vikings are 7-point road favorites. I see that the Vikings are I think that's deserving. Vikings win that game in the 1 o'clock window. Another 1 o'clock window game, the 49ers in Tampa to take on the Buccaneers. Kind of a fun game. The Buccaneers played pretty well against the Chiefs. A tough string of games here for Tampa. They are at home, 49ers on the road. 49ers are 6.5-point favorites on the road. I would love to pick Tampa here, but I think San Francisco is going to be too strong in this game. Tampa Bay is just too banged up. The 49ers have their own injury issues, but I think the Buccaneers, yes, they're doing a great job finding a way to score points. They're really running the football well, but I think the 49ers are going to go into Tampa and take that game. So I like the 49ers to win against the Buccaneers. And let's see, let's move over to the 4 o'clock window. Of course, that's where you have the Eagles and the Cowboys. You have the Jets in Arizona taking on the Cardinals. The Jets are 2-point road favorites going into Arizona against the Cardinals. No. I think the Cardinals win this game, and I think they win it pretty easy. I mean, I am done with the Jets, guys. I'm out on the Jets entirely. And yeah, I'm kind of, Jonathan Gannon is the head coach of the Cardinals, and they're better than expected. He's been a better than expected head coach. I thought he'd be one and done there. Give the Cardinals credit. They're a plucky group, man, and I think Kyler Murray is playing at a high level. Give me the Cardinals to win that game over the New York Jets. You've got the Lions in Houston to take on the Texans on Sunday Night Football. This is a good game. And I think just about everybody is picking the Lions to win. The Texans can absolutely win this game, but I will take Detroit to go into Houston and beat the Texans. And then Monday Night Football, you've got the Dolphins in LA to take on the Rams. Tight game. Rams are only 1-point favorites here on Monday Night Football. I will take the Rams to win. I also had the Ravens winning on Thursday Night Football. My record this year straight up 86-50. I've won 63%, but I am not in first place among the Bleeding Green Nation pickers. I think it's Tyler is in the lead. Yeah, Tyler Jackson, and I think did BLG catch him? Didn't quite catch him. But Tyler is number one. But I'm moving up. I'm not going to win this year, but I'm moving up after a little bit of a rough start. But those are my thoughts on some games around the league. And let me give you my Eagles prediction for this week. I do think they go into Dallas for the first time since 2017. I think it could be a pickle juice like game, guys. I think it could be like the 2017 win. It could be like the win we saw in 2004. With the 15-second Donovan McNabb scramble. This could be the Eagles going into Dallas and just whipping up on the Cowboys. They've gone into Dallas before and whipped up on teams. The Cowboys are playing horrendous football at home, and there's no Dak Prescott to torture the Eagles this time around. I think this is going to be a game the Eagles score a lot early. Put it on cruise control with a lot of Kenny Gainwell, a lot of Jahan Dotson, a lot of Grant Calcaterra. Maybe you even see a little bit of Kenny Pickett in this game in the fourth quarter. I think the Eagles win this one 35-13 with an Eagles defense that is playing much, much better. I do not think they'll have a problem with Cooper Kupp in this game. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this edition of Eye on the Enemy. Once again, thanks to RJ for coming on the podcast and joining me. One of my favorite guests to have on to talk Eagles Dallas. Go to YouTube, watch all those Eagles, Dallas Cowboys memories, those games in Dallas, all the games I mentioned before. This is a great week to do it. I think we're going to have a stress-free Eagles-Dallas game. I really hope so anyway. I do not have it in me. You can't lose this game. with the way things are going with the Cowboys, you cannot lose this game. You got to go into Dallas, and you've got to end this 7-year run of futility in the Lone Star State. The Eagles will go in and do that. Hope everybody enjoys the game at 4:25 kickoff on CBS. Enjoy it, revel in the Cowboys' misery, and I'll talk to you next week right here on Eye on the Enemy.